I was seated behind a pillar at my sister's wedding. Everyone pretended I wasn't family. Then a stranger sat beside me and said, "Just follow my lead and pretend you're my date." When he stood to speak, everyone turned and my sister stopped smiling. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. From the moment I received that cream-colored invitation in the mail 3 months earlier. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in April. I was living in Denver then, working as a pastry chef at a boutique bakery downtown. My apartment was small but cozy, filled with the scent of vanilla and cinnamon from my experimental baking sessions. I'd been up since 4 that morning, perfecting a new recipe for honey lavender cuissons. So, when I finally stumbled home around 2 in the afternoon, I almost missed the elegant envelope wedged between bills and grocery store circulars. Victoria was getting married. My older sister, the golden child, the daughter who could do no wrong in our mother's eyes. The invitation was formal, traditional, exactly what I expected from her. White embossed lettering announced her union to someone named Gregory, a name I'd never heard her mention during our increasingly rare phone calls. I should have been happy for her. Sisters are supposed to be happy for each other during milestone moments. But as I held that invitation, all I could think about was the last family dinner we'd attended together 6 months earlier. Our mother had hosted Thanksgiving at her house in the suburbs. I'd brought a pumpkin cheesecake I'd spent 2 days perfecting layers of spiced cream cheese and ginger snap crust that had turned out beautifully. Victoria had brought store-bought pie. "Elizabeth, you really shouldn't have gone to so much trouble," my mother said, barely glancing at my dessert before placing it on the far corner of the buffet table. "Victoria's pie looks lovely, so classic and traditional." That was how it always went. Victoria could show up empty-handed and receive praise for her presence alone. I could bring the moon on a silver platter, and it would somehow be too much, too showy, too trying too hard. The wedding invitation included a small note card handwritten in Victoria's perfect cursive. "Elizabeth, I know we haven't been as close lately, but it would mean everything to have you there. You're my only sister." I called her that evening. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted. "Victoria, I got your invitation." "Congratulations." "Oh, good. I was worried it might get lost in the mail. Can you make it?" "Of course. I wouldn't miss it. Tell me about Gregory. How did you two meet?" There was a pause just long enough to make me wonder. "At a pharmaceutical conference. He's a regional director at Bennett Health Solutions. Very successful, very established. Mother absolutely adores him." Of course, she did. I wondered if Victoria loved him or if she loved how he looked on paper. "I'm really happy for you," I said, trying to mean it. "Thank you. Listen, I have to run. We're meeting with the wedding planner in 20 minutes. I'll send you more details later." She hung up before I could say goodbye. I stared at my phone at the abrupt end to our conversation and felt something familiar settle in my chest. It wasn't quite sadness, wasn't quite anger. It was the dull ache of being perpetually secondary. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of work and preparation. I bought a new dress, a soft blue that complemented my complexion without being too attention-grabbing. I arranged time off from the bakery, much to my boss's dismay since June was our busiest season. I should have known something was wrong when Victoria didn't ask me to be a bridesmaid. She had 5 bridesmaids, I learned from her social media posts. College friends, work friends, even our cousin Jessica, who she'd barely spoken to in years. But not me. "The wedding party is already set," she explained when I finally worked up the courage to ask. "You understand, right? These are people I see regularly." I understood perfectly. I understood that I'd never be part of her inner circle, that our shared childhood meant nothing compared to her current social standing. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in late June at an upscale resort outside Denver. I drove there alone, my dress hanging carefully in the back seat, a small gift wrapped in silver paper on the passenger seat. I'd spent weeks deciding what to give them, finally settling on a set of handcrafted ceramic bowls from a local artist. Something thoughtful, something that showed I cared. The resort was stunning. Manicured lawns stretched toward mountain views, and the ceremony site overlooked a pristine lake. White chairs were arranged in perfect rows, and flowers seemed to bloom from every available surface. Victoria had spared no expense, which meant her mother had spared no expense. This was the wedding she'd always dreamed of, the perfect culmination of her perfect daughter's perfect life. I arrived 2 hours early, hoping to find Victoria and offer my help, or at least my support. Instead, I found chaos. The bridal suite was filled with laughing women in matching robes, champagne glasses in hand, while a photographer captured every moment. I knocked softly on the open door. Victoria glanced up, from her makeup chair, her eyes meeting mine for just a second before sliding away. "Elizabeth, you're here early. I thought maybe I could help with something. Everything's under control. The wedding planner has it all handled. Why don't you go find your seat?" The ceremony starts soon. One of the bridesmaids, a blonde woman I didn't recognize, giggled and whispered something to the woman next to her. They both looked at me and smiled in that way people do when they're being polite, but really wish you'd leave. I backed out of the room, my face burning. I shouldn't have come early. I shouldn't have assumed I'd be welcome in that inner sanctum of pre-wedding preparations. The ceremony site was still being prepared when I made my way outside. Staff members rushed around with last-minute adjustments, perfecting what was already perfect. I wandered to the area where guest seating had been arranged, looking for my name card. Row after row of chairs stretched before me, each row marked with small numbered signs. The front rows were clearly reserved for immediate family and VIPs. I expected to find my name somewhere in the second or third row, close enough to show I mattered, far enough to acknowledge I wasn't part of Victoria's daily life. I found my name card in the back row, the very last row, partially hidden behind a decorative pillar that supported the ceremony arbor. From that seat, have a blocked view of the ceremony, unable to see my sister's face as she said her vows. I stood there holding that little card with my name printed in elegant script, and something inside me cracked. This wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate. This was Victoria's way of putting me exactly where she thought I belonged. Out of sight, out of mind, barely acknowledged. I could have left then. I could have driven back to Denver, called in sick, and spent the day nursing my wounded pride with ice cream and bad television. But stubbornness kept my feet planted. I was her sister, and I'd been invited, and I'd be damned if I'd give her the satisfaction of my absence. Guests began arriving around 4 in the afternoon. I watched from my position behind the pillar as people found their seats, greeted each other warmly, and took photos against the picturesque backdrop. I recognized some faces from family gathering, aunts and uncles and cousins I hadn't seen in years. None of them noticed me tucked away in my corner. Our mother arrived 20 minutes before the ceremony, resplendent in a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was escorted to the front row by a groomsman, beaming and accepting congratulations from everyone she passed. She didn't look back, didn't scan the crowd for her younger daughter. Why would she? I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Invisible. The ceremony began at 5 exactly. Music swelled from hidden speakers, and the wedding party processed down the aisle. Each bridesmaid looked beautiful in their matching sage green dresses, carrying bouquets of white roses and eucalyptus. The groomsmen followed in sharp navy suits. Then came the ring bearer and flower girl, children I didn't recognize, probably from Gregory's family. Finally, Victoria appeared on our father's arm. Even from my obstructed view, I could see she was stunning. Her dress was a masterpiece of lace and silk, her veil trailing behind her like a cloud. Our father, who I'd barely spoken to since my parents' divorce 5 years earlier, looked proud and distinguished in his tuxedo. I craned my neck around the pillar, trying to catch a better view. The angle was terrible. I could see maybe 40% of the actual ceremony, mostly just the backs of people's heads and occasional glimpses of the officiants. That's when I noticed I wasn't alone in the back row. A man sat 2 chairs away from me, partially hidden by the same pillar. He was younger than most of the guests, maybe in his early 30s, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His dark hair was styled casually, and he had the kind of sharp features that belonged in a magazine advertisement. But what struck me most was the expression on his face. He looked as out of place and uncomfortable as I felt. He caught me looking and offered a small, sympathetic smile. I smiled back weakly before returning my attention to the ceremony, or what I could see of it. The officiant spoke about love and commitment and partnership. Victoria and Gregory exchanged vows that I couldn't quite hear from my position. They exchanged rings, kissed to enthusiastic applause, and just like that, my sister was married. The ceremony lasted maybe 25 minutes, though it felt both longer and shorter than that. As guests began standing and moving toward the cocktail hour location, the stranger from my row approached me. Up close, he was even more striking with intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see more than they should. That was quite a view, wasn't it? His voice carried a hint of amusement. Spectacular, I replied dryly. I especially enjoyed the back of that gentleman's head. In row 8, very photogenic. He laughed, a genuine sound that made something in my chest loosen slightly. I'm Julian, and I'm guessing from your prime seating assignment that you're either someone's least favorite relative or you insulted the wedding planner. Elizabeth, and I'm the bride's sister, actually. His eyebrows rose, surprise crossing his features. Her sister? And they put you back here? Apparently. I'm not part of the wedding aesthetic. Julian studied me for a moment, and I had the distinct impression he was seeing far more than my bitter humor. Well, that's their loss. The cocktail hour is about to start, and I have a feeling it's going to be just as awkward as the ceremony. What do you say we face it together? You don't have to pity me. I'm fine. It's not pity. It's strategic alliance. I'm here as a +1 for my business associate who couldn't make it, which means I know exactly 3 people at this wedding, and 2 of them are the couple who just got married and won't remember I exist. So really, you'd be doing me a favor. There was something genuine in his offer, something that made me want to say yes, despite my wounded pride. Before I could respond, he extended his arm in an old-fashioned gesture. Shall we? I hesitated for only a moment before linking my arm through his together. We walked toward the cocktail hour, and for the first time since arriving at this wedding, I didn't feel completely alone. The cocktail hour was held in a spacious pavilion overlooking the lake. Round tables were scattered throughout, each topped with more flowers and candles. A bar dominated one wall, and servers circulated with trays of appetizers that looked almost too beautiful to eat. Almost. As a pastry chef, I had strong feelings about food as art, and whoever had catered this event knew their craft. Julian stayed close as we navigated through the crowd. People clustered in small groups, conversations buzzing with the pleasant energy that comes with free-flowing champagne and the happiness of a wedding celebration. Several guests glanced our way with curiosity, probably wondering who the handsome stranger was and why he'd attached himself to the bride's invisible sister. We found a quiet table near the edge of the pavilion. Julian returned from the bar with 2 glasses of wine and a plate of appetizers he'd somehow convinced a server to compile for us. So he said, settling into the chair across from me, "Tell me about your sister. What's she like when she's not starring in the wedding of the century?" I took a sip of wine, considering how to answer. The truth felt too raw, too revealing, but something about Julian's steady gaze has made me want to be honest. Victoria is perfect, or at least she's always worked very hard to appear perfect. Good grades, good career, good relationships. She's the daughter every parent dreams of having. And you're not. I'm the daughter who became a pastry chef instead of a doctor or lawyer, who lives in a small apartment instead of a house with a mortgage, who dates occasionally instead of landing a pharmaceutical director with excellent prospects. I'm the disappointment, the one who didn't follow the script. Julian selected a crab cake from the plate and considered my words. Being a pastry chef sounds creative and challenging. Not everyone can master that craft. Try telling my mother that. She still introduces me as Elizabeth, who works with food, like I'm flipping burgers at a fast food chain. Family dynamics can be complicated. That's a diplomatic way of saying my family is dysfunctional. I grabbed a stuffed mushroom, suddenly ravenous. I'd been too nervous to eat earlier. What about you? What do you do that landed you an invitation to this event? I work in renewable energy consulting. My company helps businesses transition to sustainable practices. Boring technical stuff that makes people's eyes glaze over at parties. That doesn't sound boring at all. It sounds important. Thanks. Most people just want to know if I can get them a deal on solar panels. He smiled, but there was something guarded in his expression. I was supposed to be here with my colleague Dominic. He's the one who actually knows the groom through some business connection, but he came down with pneumonia last week, and I got volunteer. So, we're both wedding crashers in our own way. Survivors of inadequate seating arrangements, at least. We talked through the cocktail hour, and I found myself relaxing. Despite the circumstances, Julian was easy to talk to, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite small talk. He wanted to know about my favorite desserts to make, about the challenges of working in a professional kitchen, about why I'd chosen pastry over other culinary paths. I asked him about his work, about the satisfaction of helping companies reduce their environmental impact, about the frustrations of dealing with clients who wanted change, but weren't willing to do the hard work to achieve it. He spoke passionately about renewable energy, about creating systems that could sustain future generations, and I found myself captivated by his enthusiasm. "You really believe in what you do?" I observed. "Is that so surprising? Most people at my sister's wedding seem more interested in appearing successful than actually being passionate about anything." Julian's expression shifted, something calculating entering his eyes. "You notice a lot for someone who was sitting behind a pillar. When you're invisible, you learn to watch people. It's amazing what you see when no one knows you're looking." A server approached to announce that dinner was being served in the main ballroom. Guests began flowing toward the entrance, and Julian stood, offering his hand. "Ready to see if your seating assignment for dinner is any better?" It wasn't. The reception hall was gorgeous, decorated with what must have been thousands of dollars worth of flowers and lighting. Long tables were arranged in a U-shape with the head table elevated slightly on a platform where Victoria and Gregory would sit with their wedding party. Place cards directed guests to their assigned seats. I found my name at a table in the far corner positioned so that I'd need to crane my neck awkwardly to see the head table. The chairs around me were empty, suggesting I'd been placed with the overflow guests, the people who had to be invited but didn't quite fit anywhere else. Julian appeared at my elbow, his own place card in hands. Interesting. I'm at the opposite end of the room, almost like someone wanted to make sure the unimportant guests were spread out so we wouldn't cluster and make the seating chart look unbalanced. This is ridiculous. The words came out sharper than I intended, frustration finally breaking through my careful composure. I'm her sister, her only sibling, and she's treating me like I'm some distant acquaintance she felt obligated to invite. You know what? Screw the seating chart. Julian plucked my place card from the table and pocketed it along with his own. "Come on, what are you doing?" "Improvising. Just follow my lead and pretend you're my date." Before I could protest, he guided me toward a table much closer to the head table, one clearly designated for important guests. He pulled out a chair for me, his hand warm on my back as I sat, and then settled into the seat beside me with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where he was. "Julian, we can't just..." "We can, and we did. If anyone asks, there was a mix-up with the seating assignments and we're fixing it ourselves. Trust me." The table filled quickly with guests who seemed to know each other well. They were Gregory's business associates, I gathered from their conversation. People from the pharmaceutical industry who spoke in acronyms and trade terms I didn't understand. They greeted Julian with familiarity, calling him by name, and he responded with easy confidence that suggested he knew exactly who they were. A woman named Patricia, who introduced herself as the Vice President of Operations at Bennett Health Solutions, smiled warmly at me. "And you must be Julian's girlfriend. He's been keeping you a secret." I opened my mouth to correct her, but Julian smoothly interjected. "Elizabeth prefers to stay out of the spotlight. She's not one for corporate events usually, but she made an exception for this wedding." How sweet. "And how do you know the bride and groom?" "Elizabeth is Victoria's sister, actually." Patricia's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Oh, I had no idea Victoria had a sister. She never mentioned it during any of our meetings about the wedding arrangements." Her smile faltered slightly, as if realizing how that sounded. "I mean, I'm sure it just never came up in conversation." "I'm sure," I replied, keeping my voice neutral, even as the comment stung. My sister had worked closely enough with Gregory's colleagues to plan aspects of this wedding, and she'd never once mentioned having a sister. Dinner was served in courses, each plate more elaborate than the last. Seared scallops gave way to a fresh salad, then a choice of beef tenderloin or herb-roasted salmon. The food was exceptional, but I barely tasted it. I was too aware of Julian beside me, of the way he played his role as my date with convincing ease. His hand occasionally touched my shoulder or back in small gestures that looked casual but felt intentional. He included me in conversations, deferred to my opinions, made me feel visible, eyeball in a way I hadn't felt since arriving at this wedding. Between courses, Gregory's father stood to give a speech. He talked about his son's accomplishments, about how proud he was to welcome Victoria into their family, about the bright future ahead of the young couple. He mentioned how Victoria had brought joy and sophistication into Gregory's life, how she was exactly the kind of woman he'd always hoped his son would marry. My mother stood next. Her speech was shorter, but no less effusive. She spoke about Victoria's childhood, about her daughter's determination and grace, about how she'd always known Victoria would achieve great things. She talked about the wedding planning process, about mother-daughter shopping trips and cake tastings, and all the precious moments they'd shared. She didn't mention me once, not even in passing, not even to acknowledge that Victoria had a sibling. It was as if I'd been edited out of the family history entirely. I felt Julian's hand and mine under the table, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture of support. I squeezed back, grateful for the anchor. Then came the best man's speech, full of jokes about Gregory's bachelor days and heartfelt sentiments about finding true love. The maid of honor followed with stories about Victoria's perfectionism and her romantic nature, about how she'd always dreamed of a fairy tale wedding. I waited for someone to mention me, to acknowledge my existence in even the most minimal way, but speech after speech passed and my name never came up. I was the ghost at the feast, present but unseen. Dessert was served, an elaborate tiered creation of chocolate and raspberry that looked impressive but lacked the depth of flavor it should have had. The ganache was too sweet, the cake layers too dry. As a professional, I couldn't help but critique it, and Julian noticed my expression. "Not up to your standards. It's beautiful, but beauty isn't everything. The execution is off. The chocolate is masking the raspberry instead of complementing it, and the texture is too dense. Could you do better in my sleep?" The words came out more confident than I felt, but they were true. I might be the family disappointment in every other area, but in the kitchen, I knew my worth. "I believe you," Julian said simply. After dessert, the reception transitioned into the dancing portion of the evening. Victoria and Gregory took the floor for their first dance, swirling together under perfect lighting while a live band played a romantic ballad. They looked like something from a magazine, the perfect couple having their perfect moment. My father cut in for the father-daughter dance, and I watched the two of them move together, remembering that times he'd spun me around our living room when I was small, before the divorce, before everything fell apart. Did Victoria remember those times? Did she ever think about the family we used to be? Julian stood and offered his hand. "Dance with me. You don't have to keep playing the attentive date. I'm fine. I know I don't have to. I want to. Besides, I'm a terrible dancer, and I need someone to step on who won't sue me." I let him lead me onto the dance floor. He wasn't terrible at all. He was quite good, actually, leading with confidence while keeping a respectful distance. We swayed to the music, and I found myself relaxing into the rhythm, into the moment. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For tonight, for sitting with me, for the whole fake date thing. You didn't have to do any of this. Maybe I wanted to." "You're interesting, Elizabeth. More interesting than anyone else at this wedding. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're talented and underappreciated. I know you see through the superficial nonsense that most people accept without question. I know you're hurt, but you're trying not to show it, and that takes strength." His words hit something deep inside me, a place I'd been protecting all evening. My eyes burned with unshed tears, and I blinked rapidly, refusing to cry at my sister's wedding. The song ended and transitioned into something more upbeat. Other couples joined the dance floor, and Julian guided us to the edge, away from the crowd. "I need some air," I admitted. "Let's go outside." We slipped out of the ballroom onto a terrace that overlooked the gardens. The evening air was cool and welcome after the warmth of the crowded reception. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees, creating a magical atmosphere that felt at odds with the turmoil inside me. "I shouldn't have come," I said, leaning against the terrace railing. I knew it would be like this, but some part of me hoped it would be different. That maybe Victoria would remember we're sisters. That maybe she'd want me here for real, and not just to check a box on her obligation list. Julian stood beside me, his shoulder touching mine. "Family can be the most complicated relationship we have. We're bound to them, by blood, but that doesn't guarantee love or respect, or even basic consideration. You sound like you're speaking from experience." "My father and I haven't spoken in 3 years. He had very specific plans for my life. And when I chose a different path, he made it clear I was no longer the son he wanted. So yes, I understand what it feels like to be the disappointment." I turned to look at him, seeing new layers in his expression. "I'm sorry. That must have been painful." "It was. It is. But I learned something important from it. The people who are supposed to love us unconditionally are still people with their own limitations and prejudices and failures. Sometimes the family we choose matters more than the family we're born into. Is that what tonight is? You choosing to be kind to a stranger. Maybe it started that way, but you're not a stranger anymore, Elizabeth. And this isn't just kindness." There was something in his voice, something that made my heart beat faster. Before I could respond, the terrace doors opened and a group of guests spilled out, laughing and talking. The moment broke, and Julian stepped back slightly. "We should probably go back inside. I think they're about to cut the cake." The cake-cutting ceremony was everything I expected. More photos, more speeches, more perfect moments carefully choreographed for maximum impact. Victoria fed Gregory a small bite with delicate precision, and he returned the gesture with equal care. No smashed cake in faces, nothing undignified, perfect control, as always. As servers distributed slices of the wedding cake, I noticed my mother making her way through the crowd, stopping to chat with various guests. She was in her element, basking in the reflected glory of her daughter's successful wedding. When her gaze finally landed on me, surprise flickered across her features, followed quickly by disapproval. She approached our table with measured steps, her smile tightening as she drew closer. "Elizabeth, I didn't expect to see you sitting here. This table was reserved for Gregory's business associates. There was a seating mix-up," Julian said smoothly before I could respond. "I'm Julian, one of Gregory's renewable energy consultants. Elizabeth and I are here together." My mother's gaze swept over Julian, taking in his expensive suit and confident demeanor. I could see her recalculating, reassessing my presence based on the caliber of my companion. "I see. Well, it's lovely to meet you, Julian. I'm Eleanor, Victoria's mother." She emphasized the words as if to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. I wasn't aware Elizabeth was seeing anyone. "We've been keeping things quiet," Julian replied, his hand finding mine on the table. Elizabeth is quite private about her personal life. Yes, she is. Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. Elizabeth, dear, I hope you're enjoying the wedding. Victoria worked so hard to make everything perfect. It's beautiful, I said, forcing the words out. She must be very happy. She is. Gregory is exactly the kind of man I always hoped she'd marry. Successful, established, from a good family. It's everything a mother could want for her daughter. The unspoken comparison hung in the air between us. Unlike you, who works in a bakery and lives alone and has nothing to show for your life. Julian's grip on my hand tightened slightly. Silent show of support. Elizabeth was just telling me about her work as a pastry chef. It sounds incredibly demanding. Not everyone has the talent or discipline to succeed in that field. Eleanor's expression flickered with annoyance at having her implied criticism deflected. Yes, well, we all have our different paths. I should get back to the other guests. Do try to enjoy yourself, Elizabeth. She swept away, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and maternal disappointment in her wake. That was unpleasant, Julian observed once she was out of your shot. That was my mother on a good day. You should see her when she's really trying to make a point. I'm starting to understand why you were sitting behind that pillar. The evening wore on. The band played. People danced. Drinks flowed freely. Victoria and Gregory made their rounds, thanking guests for coming and accepting congratulations. I watched them work the room with practice efficiency, noting how they spent more time with some guests than others, how they carefully maintained the hierarchy of importance. They reached our table eventually, Gregory leading with a politician's smile. Up close, I could see he was handsome in a conventional way, with the kind of features that photographed well but lacked character. His handshake was firm but perfunctory when Julian introduced himself. Then Victoria's eyes landed on me, and something complex passed across her face. Surprise, definitely. Discomfort, perhaps. She'd probably forgotten I was even here, tucked away in my assigned corner where I couldn't interfere with her perfect day. Elizabeth, you look lovely, she said, her voice carrying that careful politeness people use with acquaintances they don't quite remember. Thank you. The wedding is beautiful, Victoria. Congratulations. I'm so glad you could make it, and I see you've met some of Gregory's colleagues. Her gaze slid to Julian with curiosity. I don't believe we've been introduced. Julian, I work with Gregory on sustainability initiatives for Bennett Health Solutions, and I have the pleasure of being Elizabeth's date this evening. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. This was clearly news to her. Oh, I didn't realize you were seeing anyone. Elizabeth, how wonderful. The way she said it with that slight emphasis on the word wonderful suggested she found it more surprising than wonderful, as if she couldn't quite believe someone like Julian would be interested in someone like me. We've been dating for a few months, Julian continued, his arms sliding around my waist in a gesture that looked natural and possessive. Elizabeth is remarkable. I count myself lucky she tolerates my workaholic tendencies. How nice, Victoria said, though her smile had frozen slightly. Well, we should continue making our rounds. So many people to thank. But let's catch up properly soon. Elizabeth, I feel like we haven't really talked in ages. They moved on, and I released a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. That was surreal. She seemed surprised to see you looking happy. Victoria isn't used to me having anything she might consider valuable, including a handsome date who impresses her new in-laws. So, you think I'm handsome? Julian's eyes danced with amusement. Don't let it go to your head. You're objectively attractive. It's not a personal observation, of course not. Purely objective. Around 10 in the evening, the wedding coordinator made an announcement that the bride and groom would be leaving shortly. Guests were invited to line up outside with sparklers for the send-off. I debated Ed skipping this part, but Julian convinced me to participate. You came this far? Might as well see it through to the end. We stood in line as sparklers were distributed, and when Victoria and Gregory emerged from the venue, we held our sparkling lights high along with everyone else. They ran through the corridor of light, laughing and waving before climbing into a luxury car that would take them to their honeymoon suite at the resort. As the car pulled away, tail lights disappearing into the night, I felt a strange sense of finality. The wedding was over. Victoria had gotten her perfect day, her perfect marriage, her perfect life, and I had stood witness to it all from my position on the margins, exactly where she wanted me. Guests began dispersing, some heading to their rooms at the resorts, others moving toward the parking lot. Julian and I lingered on the steps, neither of us quite ready to acknowledge that the evening was ending. "Can I walk you to your car?" he asked. "I'm actually staying at the resort tonight, room 314. I figured it would be easier than driving back to Denver this late." I hesitated, then added, "What about you?" "Same, room 209. My colleague had already booked the room before he got sick, so it seemed wasteful not to use it. We walked slowly through the gardens. Following the lit path back toward the main resort building, the night air had cooled further and I shivered slightly in my thin dress. Julian immediately shrugged out of his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders, a gesture so classic and unexpected that I almost laughed. "You don't have to do that. I'm fine. Humor me. I was raised with old-fashioned manners, and my mother would haunt me if I let you freeze." His jacket was warm and smelled like expensive Ive cologne mixed with something uniquely him. I pulled it closer, grateful for both the warmth and the excuse to keep something of his with me a little longer. "Thank you," I said, "for everything tonight. You turned what could have been a miserable evening into something almost bearable." "Just bearable? I'll have to work on my fake dating skills." "Okay, better than bearable. Surprisingly pleasant in parts, that's more like it." He stopped walking, turning to face me. "Elizabeth, I know tonight started as a strategic alliance between two wedding outcasts, but I want you to know it became more than that for me. You're genuinely interesting, funny, talented, and far too good for people who can't see your worth." His words wrapped around something fragile inside me, something I'd been protecting for too long. "Julian, I know we just met. I know this is strange timing, but I'd like to see you again after tonight. After this wedding in the real world where we're just two people without assigned seating charts and family drama." I wanted to say yes, immediately. Every instinct told me this man was different, that this connection was real despite the unusual circumstances. But doubt crept in. The voice that sounded suspiciously like my mother reminding me that men like Julian didn't date women like me, that this was probably just kindness extended through one evening and nothing more. "You don't have to say that just because you felt sorry for me tonight. I'm not. I'm saying it because I spent the evening with someone I genuinely enjoyed, and I want more evenings like that. Because you make me laugh and think and feel less alone in crowded rooms. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing better." He paused, vulnerability crossing his features. "But if you're not interested, I understand. I don't want to push." "I am interested," I admitted, the words rushing out before I could second-guess them. "I just don't want to get my hopes up about something that might disappear in the morning light." "Then let's make sure it doesn't disappear. Have breakfast with me tomorrow? The resort has a decent restaurant and we can talk without tuxedos and wedding stress." "What do you say? Breakfast? Sounds good." His smile was genuine and relieved. 9 I'll meet you in the lobby." We'd reached the entrance to the resort. The lobby beyond was quiet, most guests having already retired to their rooms. This was the moment where the evening would officially end, where we'd go our separate ways, and I'd be alone with the weight of everything I'd witnessed and endured. Julian seemed reluctant to leave too. He stood close, his hand still holding mine, his eyes searching my face as if trying to memorize it. "Good night, Elizabeth. I'm glad I crashed your sister's wedding. I'm glad you did too." "Good night, Julian." He leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted. I didn't want. His lips met mine in a kiss that was gentle and questioning and somehow exactly right. It lasted only a moment before he pulled back, his thumb brushing my cheek. Then he was walking away toward the elevators, and I was standing alone in the lobby wearing his jacket and touching my lips and wondering what exactly had just happened. I made my way to my room in a daze. The space was nice, decorated in neutral tones with a view of the gardens. I hung Julian's jacket carefully in the closet, changed into my pajamas, and collapsed onto the bed. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Thanks for coming tonight." It meant a lot to have you there. I stared at the message for a long moment. It meant a lot, really. Was that why she'd relegated me to the worst seat in the house? Why she'd never mentioned having a sister? Why she'd looked surprised to find me at a decent table during the reception? I typed and deleted several responses before settling on something non-committal. "Congratulations again. The wedding was beautiful," she responded immediately. "We should definitely get together when I'm back from the honeymoon. I want to hear all about your new boyfriend. He seems very successful." Of course, that's what she'd taken away from the evening. Not that I'd been there supporting her, not that we'd barely spoken all night, but that I'd shown up with an impressive date. That was the only thing that made me visible to her. I didn't respond. Instead, I set my phone aside and stared at the ceiling, processing the emotional whiplash of the entire day. I'd come to this wedding expecting to feel like an outsider, and I'd been proven right in the worst ways. But I'd also met Julian, had those hours of feeling seen and valued, and now I had breakfast to look forward to in the morning. Sleep came slowly, my mind replaying moments from the evening. Victoria's perfect smile, my mother's dismissive comments, Julian's hand in mine, the sparklers lighting up the night sky. Tomorrow I'd go home to Denver, back to my apartment and my job and my regular life. But something had shifted tonight. Some fundamental understanding about my place in my family and my own worth. I woke around 8 the next morning to sunlight streaming through the curtains. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then the previous day came flooding back, bringing with it a mix of emotions I wasn't quite ready to face. I showered and dressed carefully in casual clothes I'd packed, trying to look effortlessly pretty without seeming like I was trying too hard. The irony wasn't lost on me. After spending an entire wedding being invisible, I was now worried about making a good impression on a man I'd just met. Julian was waiting in the lobby at 9 exactly, looking refreshed in jeans and a navy sweater that made his gray eyes even more striking. He smiled when he saw me, a genuine expression that made my stomach flutter. "Good morning. You look beautiful. You look pretty good yourself." Is that my line, though? Aren't men supposed to be the ones getting compliments on their appearance? I believe in equal opportunity compliments. Come on. I heard they make excellent waffles here. The restaurant was moderately busy with other hotel guests, but we found a quiet table by the window overlooking the lake. Morning light sparkled on the water, and the whole scene felt peaceful in a way the previous day's festivities hadn't. Over breakfast, we talked more freely than we had at the wedding. Julian told me about his work, about a particularly challenging project he was managing with a manufacturing company resistant to change. I told him about the bakery, about my boss who was brilliant but temperamental, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and delicious that brought joy to people. "You light up when you talk about baking, Julie." And observed, cutting into his waffle, "It's obvious you love what you do." I do. It's the one area of my life where I feel completely confident. No second guessing, no wondering if I'm good enough. I know I'm good at what I do. Then why do you let your family make you feel otherwise? The question was direct, almost confrontational, but his tone remained gentle. I set down my fork, considering how to answer. Because they're my family. Because some part of me still wants their approval, even though I know I'll never get it. Not the way Victoria gets it anyway. What if you stopped wanting their approval? What if you decided your opinion of yourself mattered more than theirs? Easier said than done when you've spent your whole life being compared to someone and coming up short. Julian reached across the table, his hand covering mine. For what it's worth, I think you're extraordinary, and I don't say that lightly. We finished breakfast and walked outside, neither of us quite ready to part ways. The morning was beautiful, the kind of June day that promised summer without the oppressive heat. Other guests were checking out, loading luggage into cars, heading back to their regular lives. I should probably get on the road soon, I said reluctantly. I have work tomorrow, and I need to prep some things this afternoon. Before you go, can I ask you something? Julian's expression turned serious. Last night, watching how your family treated you, seeing how they've made you feel small and unimportant, it made me angry. Not just sympathetic, but genuinely angry on your behalf. That's kind of you. But I'm not finished. What if there was a way to change the narrative, to make them see you differently, to give you back some of the power they've been taking from you all these years? I studied his face, trying to understand where this was going. What do you mean? I mean, what if we continued this, not fake dating, but real dating? What if we spent time together, built something genuine, and along the way showed your family that you're not the disappointment they've painted you as? Julian, I'm not going to use you to make my family jealous. That's not fair to you. You wouldn't be using me. I'm offering because I want to see you again regardless, but I also want to help you if I can. Think about it. Your sister just married a pharmaceutical executive, right? Well, I happen to be someone her new husband's company needs, someone who could make things very interesting for them. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the morning air. What are you saying exactly? Julian's expression shifted, becoming more calculating than I'd seen before. I'm saying that Gregory's company, Bennett Health Solutions, has been in talks with my firm about a major sustainability overhaul. It's a multi-million-dollar project that would significantly improve their environmental impact and their public image. I'm one of the lead consultants on the proposal. And you'd use that as leverage somehow. Not leverage exactly, just an opportunity to remind them that people they overlook might be more important than they realize. Your family, especially Victoria, seems very invested in status and success. What if you suddenly had access to that world through me? What if they had to see you differently? I should have said no. I should have thanked him for the thought, but explained that revenge wasn't my style, that I was above such pettiness. But standing there, in the morning light, remembering every slight and dismissal from the night before. Something darker whispered that maybe I deserved a little vindication. This feels manipulative, I said slowly. Is it more manipulative than seating you behind a pillar at your own sister's wedding? Than never mentioning you have a sister to colleagues she worked with on planning? Than your mother pretending you don't exist in her speeches? Julian's voice was passionate. Now, sometimes the people who hurt us need to be shown consequences, not cruelty, just consequences. What would this actually look like? I'm not going to sabotage anyone's business or career. I'm not that person. Nothing like that. I'm talking about visibility, about making sure you're present and acknowledged at future family events, about your sister and mother realizing that dismissing you means potentially damaging relationships that matter to Gregory's career, about you finally getting the respect you deserve, even if it starts from a place of obligation rather than genuine affection. It was twisted logic, and I knew it. But it was also seductive. How many years had I spent being invisible? How many family gatherings had I endured being treated as lesser? The thought of Victoria being forced to acknowledge me, to include me, to treat me like I mattered, it was intoxicating. I need to think about this, I said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Elizabeth, whether you agree to any of this or not, I meant what I said about wanting to see you again. That part is real, no manipulation involved. We exchanged phone numbers before parting. Julian kissed me goodbye, another gentle kiss that made my heart race. And then I was driving back to Denver with my thoughts in turmoil. The next week passed in a blur of work and confusion. Julian texted me daily, casual messages about his day that gradually built into longer conversations, We talked about everything and nothing. Books we'd read, places we wanted to travel, childhood memories that shaped us. He never pushed about his proposition, never brought up Victoria or revenge or any of it. He just talked to me like I was someone worth knowing. On Friday he called. I have a business dinner next Thursday in Denver. A potential client I'm trying to woo. Would you want to join me? Fair warning, it might be boring corporate talk, but I'd love your company. Are you sure? I don't know anything about renewable energy consulting. That's exactly why I want you there. You'll keep me honest. Keep the conversation from disappearing completely into jargon. Plus, the restaurant is supposed to have an incredible pastry chef. I thought you might enjoy critiquing their desserts. I laughed despite myself. You're bribing me with professional reconnaissance. Is it working? Yes. What's the dress code? Thursday arrived faster than I expected. I left work early to prepare, changing into a black dress that was elegant without being flashy. Julian picked me up at 7, looking devastatingly handsome in a dark suit. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place where the menu does not list prices and the wine list requires a sumaya to navigate. Julian's client was already there, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who I recognized from Victoria's wedding. She'd been at our table, one of Gregory's colleagues from Bennett Health Solutions. Her eyes widened with recognition when she saw me. Elizabeth, what a lovely surprise. I didn't realize you and Julian were still together. Still together? And going strong? Julian said smoothly, his hand warm on my back. Elizabeth has been patient with my crazy work schedule. We sat, and I tried to fade into the background as Julian and Patricia discussed the sustainability project, but Patricia kept pulling me into the conversation, asking about my work, expressing genuine interest in the bakery where I worked. That sounds fascinating. I have such respect for people who work with their hands, who create tangible things. My job is all spreadsheets and conference calls. Sometimes I miss making something real. The dinner progressed pleasantly, and when dessert arrived, a deconstructed lemon tart with lavender cream. I couldn't help offering my professional opinion. The components are technically excellent, but they're fighting each other rather than creating harmony. The lavender is too strong, overwhelming the lemon instead of complementing it. Patricia leaned forward with interest. Could you fix it? If you were making this, what would you change? I found myself explaining the balance of flavors, the importance of letting each element shine without dominating. Julian watched me with something like pride, and Patricia listened intently, asking follow-up questions that showed she was genuinely engaged. You know, we're planning a major corporate event in August, Patricia said as coffee was served. A celebration for the successful completion of our sustainability project, assuming Julian's team delivers everything they've promised, of course. She smiled at him. We haven't settled on a caterer yet. Would your bakery be interested in handling the desserts? I blinked, caught off guard. We're a small operation. I'm not sure we'd have the capacity for a large corporate event. Let me rephrase. Would you personally be interested in creating desserts for the event? We could work around your schedule, and I'm authorized to offer very competitive compensation. Julian squeezed my hand under the table, a silent show of support. Elizabeth's work is exceptional. You'd be lucky to have her. I'd need to talk to my boss, make sure it wouldn't conflict with bakery commitments, but yes, I'd be interested in discussing it further. Patricia smiled warmly. Excellent. I'll have my assistant reach out to you next week with details. And Julian, excellent choice in girlfriend. She's delightful. After dinner, Julian drove me home. I was quiet, processing what had just happened. At my apartment building, he parked and turned to face me. That was quite an evening, he said. Did you plan that? The dessert conversation, Patricia offering me that job. I didn't plan anything. I told Patricia we were having dinner with her, and I mentioned you were a pastry chef. The rest was all her genuine interest and your talent speaking for itself. But you knew she might offer me something. I hoped she might see what I see, that you're incredibly skilled at what you do and deserve opportunities to showcase that talent. Is that so wrong? I studied his face in the dim light from the street lamp. I can't tell if you're genuinely trying to help me or if this is all part of some elaborate revenge plot. Can't it be both? I care about you, Elizabeth. That's real. But I also think the people who've dismissed you should be forced to reckon with your worth. Not through sabotage or cruelty, just through reality. Through them having to acknowledge your talent and value because it affects things they care about. This is complicated. The best things usually are. He reached over, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. For what it's worth, I'm falling for you. That complicates things too. But I'm not sorry about it. My breath caught. Julian, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know where I stand. Now go inside before I do something impulsive like kiss you senseless in front of your building. I got out of the car, but leaned back through the window. I'm falling for you too, just so you know. His smile could have lit up the entire city. Good. That makes what comes next easier. What comes next? Patience. You'll see. The following week, Patricia's assistant called with details about the corporate event. It would be in mid-August, celebrating the completion of Bennett Health Solutions' transition to sustainable practices. They wanted an elaborate dessert spread for 200 guests, and they were offering 3 times my usual rate. I discussed it with my boss, who was thrilled at the prospect of the exposure and the money. We worked out an arrangement where I'd use the bakery kitchen during off hours, and the bakery would get credited as a partner, while I'd receive the bulk of the payments. Julian and I fell into a pattern over the next few weeks. Dinners, movies, long conversations that stretched late into the night. He was easy to be with, making me laugh and challenging me to think differently about things. The physical attraction was undeniable, but what surprised me was how much I enjoyed simply being around him. We didn't talk much about Victoria or my family during those weeks. It was like we'd created a bubble where that drama didn't exist, where I could just be myself without the weight of family expectations. Then 6 weeks after the wedding, Victoria called Elizabeth. Hi, sorry I haven't been in touch since the honeymoon. Things have been crazy with settling into married life. No worries, how was the trip? Incredible. The Maldives were everything we hoped. Listen, I wanted to see if you were free for lunch this Saturday. I feel like we haven't really talked in forever and I want to catch up properly. I almost said no out of habit, but then I thought about Julian's words about visibility and respect. Sure, I can do lunch. Where did you have in mind? We met at an upscale bistro near her new house, the kind of place where Victoria felt comfortable. She looked tanned and relaxed, the picture of newlywed bliss. We ordered salads and made small talk about the honeymoon, about her new neighborhood, about Gregory's work. So, she said finally, "Tell me about Julian. You two seemed quite close at the wedding, but you never mentioned you were seeing anyone." It's relatively new. We met a few months ago through work connections. He seems very successful. Gregory's colleagues were all impressed by him. Apparently, his company is handling a massive project for Bennett Health. There it was. The real reason for this lunch, not sisterly bonding, but fishing for information about someone who mattered to her husband's career. Julian's very good at what he does, I said neutrally. I'm just surprised you never mentioned him before. I mean, I told you all about Gregory when we started dating. Had she, though? I remembered stilted phone calls where she'd mentioned having a boyfriend but provided few details, but pointing that out would only create conflict, and I was curious to see where this conversation was heading. I tend to keep my personal life private. Well, I'm glad you're happy, and I heard you're doing the desserts for the Bennett Health event in August. That's wonderful. Gregory mentioned Patricia was very impressed with you. It's a good opportunity. Victoria stirred her salad absently. Listen, I wanted to apologize if things felt weird at the wedding. I know the seating arrangement wasn't ideal, and I feel bad that we didn't get much time to talk. The seating arrangement put me behind a pillar, Victoria. It wasn't just not ideal, it was humiliating. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was the wedding planner's mistake. She didn't understand family dynamics, and by the time I saw the setup, it was too late to change things without causing chaos. You could have mentioned having a sister to Gregory's colleagues, to anyone, but you didn't. That's not fair. Of course, people know I have a sister. Patricia didn't. She was surprised at the wedding when Julian mentioned it. She said you'd never brought it up during all your planning meetings. Victoria's face flushed. I don't talk about my personal life at work. That doesn't mean I'm hiding you, doesn't it, though? When was the last time you invited me to anything? When did you last call just to talk? Not because you needed something or had an obligation. Elizabeth, you're being dramatic. We're sisters. Of course, we have a relationship, do we? Because from where I'm sitting, we have a biological connection and not much else. You treat me like an afterthought, like someone you have to include out of duty, but would rather forget. Victoria set down her fork, her composure cracking slightly. Is that really what you think? That I don't care about you? I think you care about me the way you care about distant cousins, present at major events, but not really part of your life. And honestly, I've accepted that. What bothers me is the pretense. Don't invite me to lunch and act like we're close when we both know we're not. Fine. You want honesty? I'll give you honesty. You made choices that embarrassed our mother. You chose a career path that she couldn't brag about to her friends. You refused to conform to the expectations we grew up with. And yes, that created distance between us. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but it's the truth. Her words confirmed what I'd always suspected, but never heard spoken aloud. I wasn't the disappointment because I'd failed. I was the disappointment because I'd refused to compete on their terms. Thank you for finally being honest, I said, quietly. But here's some honesty back. I'm not embarrassed by my choices. I love what I do and I'm good at it. If that's not enough for you or mother, that's your problem, not mine. And I'm done apologizing for being myself. I stood placing enough cash on the table to cover my meal. Thanks for lunch, Victoria, and congratulations again on your marriage. I hope it brings you everything you're looking for. I left before she could respond, my hands shaking as I walked to my car. The conversation had been brutal but necessary. Something inside me had shifted, some fundamental refusal to keep accepting crumbs of affection from people who saw me as lesser. Julian called that evening. I told him about the lunch, about Victoria's admission, about how I'd finally stood up for myself. I'm proud of you, he said. That took courage. It felt good. Terrifying, but good. Like I finally said things that needed saying. Are you ready for the next step? What next step? The Bennett Health event is in 3 weeks. I want you there as my date, not just as the pastry chef. I want you visible and acknowledged and impossible to dismiss. Are you ready for that? I thought about Victoria's face during our lunch, about my mother's dismiss. Comments at the wedding about all the years of being treated as less than. Yes, I'm ready. The 3 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. I worked obsessively on the dessert menu, creating elegant individual portions that would be both beautiful and delicious. Chocolate raspberry tarts with gold leaf, lemon panna cotta with edible flowers, miniature opera cakes with perfect layers, honey lavender macarons that melted on the tongue. Each piece was a work of art, proof of my skill and dedication. Julian helped where he could, taste testing components and offering honest feedback. Our relationship had deepened during this time, moving from the exciting uncertainty of new romance into something more solid. I was in love with him, though I hadn't said the words aloud. I suspected he felt the same. The night of the event arrived. It was being held at an elegant event space downtown, all glass, walls, and modern architecture. I'd spent the afternoon setting up the dessert display, arranging each piece on tiered stands with strategic lighting to highlight the artistry. I changed into a stunning emerald dress Julian had insisted on buying me, telling me I needed to look as impressive as my desserts. My hair was styled in soft waves, my makeup flawless. When Julian saw me, his expression made the effort worthwhile. "You're breathtaking," he said simply. "You clean up pretty well yourself." The event was already in full swing when we made our entrance. 200 guests mingled throughout the space, pharmaceutical executives and city officials and business leaders. I spotted Gregory and Victoria across the room, deep in conversation with a group of colleagues. My mother was there too, looking elegant in champagne silk. Patricia spotted us immediately and rushed over. Elizabeth, the desserts are stunning. Everyone is already talking about them. You've outdone yourself, thank you. I'm glad they meet expectations. Meet them. You've exceeded them by miles. Come, I want to introduce you to some people. The next hour was surreal. Patricia pulled me from group to group, introducing me as the talented pastry chef responsible for the incredible desserts. People complimented my work, asked about my training, requested business cards. I was visible in a way I'd never been at family events, acknowledged for my actual skills rather than dismissed for my choices. Julian stayed close, his presence both supportive and strategic. He made sure to mention our relationship to everyone we spoke with, positioning me not just as the chef, but as his partner. In this world that valued connections and status, being Julian's girlfriend carried weight. I watched Victoria notice us from across the room, saw her expression shift from confused confusion to recognition to something that looked like discomfort. She said something to Gregory, and they both looked our way. "They've spotted us," Julian murmured in my ear. "Ready for what? To remind them you exist." Before I could respond, Gregory was approaching with Victoria beside him. Up close, he looked strained, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Julian, Elizabeth, good to see you both, Elizabeth. I've heard nothing but praise for your desserts. Very impressive work." "Thank you. I'm pleased they've been well received." Victoria stood slightly behind Gregory, her expression carefully neutral. "Hi, Elizabeth. Everything looks beautiful." "Thank you, Victoria." An awkward silence stretched between us. Finally, Gregory broke it. "Julian, I was hoping we could discuss the final phase of the sustainability project. There are some budget considerations we need to address." "Of course. Elizabeth, would you excuse me for a few minutes?" I nodded, and the two men moved away, leaving me alone with Victoria. The moment felt heavy with unspoken words. "You've been busy," Victoria said finally. "Landing major catering jobs, dating important consultants. Quite a change from the last time we talked. I've always been busy. You just never noticed. That's not fair, isn't it? You spent years dismissing what I do as insignificant. Now that it's benefiting your husband's business connections, suddenly it matters." Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "What do you want from me, Elizabeth? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate your career choices. I'm sorry the wedding seating was bad. I'm sorry we're not closer. Is that what you need to hear? I don't need anything from you anymore. That's what you don't understand. I'm not the little sister begging for scraps of approval. I've built a life I am proud of with people who value me for who I actually am." "People like Julian, you mean?" "Gregory says he's very influential in his field. Very useful to know." The implication stung, even though I'd expected it. "You think I'm using him, or that he's using me? That's the only way you can understand this, isn't it? As a transaction. I'm just saying it's convenient. You show up at my wedding alone and invisible. And now suddenly you're dating someone Gregory's company depends on and getting hired for major events. It's quite a transformation." Before I could respond, Julian returned with Gregory. Both men looked tense, and I wondered what had been discussed in their brief conversation. "Victoria, we should mingle with the other guests," Gregory said, his tone brooking no argument. "There are several board members here we need to speak with." Victoria shot me one last unreadable look before allowing Gregory to guide her away. I released a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "That looked intense," Julian observed. "Are you okay?" "She thinks I'm using you to gain status or that you're using me to influence Gregory's business decisions. She can't conceive of us just genuinely caring about each other. Does her opinion matter to you?" I thought about it honestly. Not as much as it would have a few months ago. I'm done needing her approval. Good, because you're about to get something better than approval. What do you mean? Julian smiled. that calculating expression I'd seen before. Watch. Patricia approached the microphone set up near the dessert display. The room quieted as she began to speak about the successful sustainability project, thanking Julian's team for their excellent work. Then she pivoted to discussing the event itself. I also want to recognize someone who made tonight extra special. Elizabeth, could you join me up here? My heart hammered as I made my way to the front. Patricia smiled warmly and continued. Elizabeth created every single dessert you've enjoyed tonight. Her artistry and skill transformed our celebration into something truly memorable. But more than that, she represents exactly the kind of innovation and dedication we're trying to foster at Bennett Health Solutions, which is why I am pleased to announce that we'll be partnering with her for all of our major events going forward. Elizabeth, thank you for your incredible work. The room erupted in applause. I stood there stunned as Patricia handed me an envelope containing the contract we'd apparently just entered into. My eyes found Julian in the crowd, saw his proud smile, and understood that he'd orchestrated this moment perfectly. Then I found Victoria. She stood next to Gregory, clapping along with everyone else, but her expression was complex. Surprise, certainly. Discomfort. Maybe even a hint of respect she'd never shown before. For our mother stood beside them looking equally shocked. For the first time in my life, I was the center of attention in a room that included my family. And it was because of my own merit, my own skills, my own worth. Not because I'd married well or achieved conventional success, but because I'd excelled at something I loved. The applause faded, and I returned to Julian's side. He pulled me close, kissing my temple. "How does it feel?" he whispered. "Like vindication, like finally being seen." "You were always worth seeing. They were just too blind to notice." The evening continued, but everything had shifted. People sought me out specifically now, not as Julian's girlfriend or Victoria's sister, but as Elizabeth, the talented pastry chef with a bright future. My mother approached eventually, her smile tight, late but present. "Congratulations, dear. That was quite an announcement. Thank you, Mother. I suppose your career choice has worked out after all." It wasn't an apology, wasn't an acknowledgement of years of dismissal, but it was something. A grudging recognition that perhaps I'd known what I was doing all along. In the months that followed, everything changed. The Bennett Health Partnership led to other opportunities, other high-profile events that showcased my work. Julian and I moved in together, our relationship deepening into something permanent and real. We talked about the future, about marriage and children, and building a life that honored both our ambitions. Victoria and I reached a cautious détente. We weren't close, probably never would be, but there was mutual respect now. She'd learned that dismissing me came with consequences, that I had value beyond her narrow definition of success. Our interactions remained formal but cordial. Family gatherings no longer the painful exercises in invisibility they'd once been. My mother struggled more with the adjustment. She'd built her identity around Victoria's achievements, and having to acknowledge mine upset her carefully maintained hierarchy. But even she couldn't ignore the reality of my success, the respect I'd earned in my field, the life I'd built on my own terms. As for Victoria and Gregory, the consequences of her treatment of me became increasingly apparent over time. Gregory's reliance on Julian's company for sustainability consulting meant that Victoria could never fully dismiss me without potentially damaging her husband's professional relationships. She'd backed herself into a corner of forced civility, having to include me in family events and acknowledge my presence because doing otherwise might reflect poorly on Gregory. The pharmaceutical industry was smaller than people realized, and word traveled fast about how executives' families conducted themselves. Victoria, who had always been so careful about maintaining the perfect image, now had to ensure that image included being a supportive sister. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd spent years making me invisible, and now she was trapped in a situation where she had to make me visible, had to sing my praises to her husband's colleagues, had to pretend we'd always been close. Every family gathering became a performance where she couldn't afford to slip, couldn't afford to show the disdain she'd once displayed so freely. Her perfect life now required my presence, and that requirement would follow her for as long as Gregory's career depended on maintaining good relationships with Julian's firm. She'd constructed her own cage, one where she'd forever be reminded that the sister she'd dismissed had become someone she couldn't afford to ignore. Looking back on that wedding day, on sitting behind that pillar, feeling visible and worthless, I could hardly recognize the person I'd been. Julian had offered me more than fake dating protection at a difficult event. He'd offered me a mirror that reflected my true worth, a partnership that elevated rather than diminished, and the tools to demand the respect I'd always deserved. The revenge, if that's what it was, hadn't been about cruelty or destruction. It had been about finally, definitively proving that I mattered not because of who I married or how I compared to my sister, but because of who I was and what I could do. And as I stood in the kitchen of the bakery I now cooned, creating art from flour and sugar and skill, I realized that the best revenge had been becoming exactly who I was meant to be and making them all watch while I did it.